And welcome to Advantage Radio Ministries, and welcome to Second Chances here at Lift FM. My name is Greg Hennis, and welcome to another wonderful program. And today we have a wonderful guest with us. His name is Professor Robert Oscar Lopez. The book we're going to be talking about is entitled Jephthah's Daughter, Innocent Casualties in the War from Family Equality. And Robert, thank you so much for joining us here on Second Chances.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure. Yeah.
Yes. Give us a little bit of background, Robert, on who you are and where you're from and how you came to know Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Just to give us a little background.
Well, I grew up in New York. I grew up actually in a very liberal environment. I was raised in the gay community. I had a gay mom. I was in a liberation theology Catholic group when I was a kid, so that's how I came into religion. And I do have to credit the liberation theology Catholics because they did, make me attentive to the Bible. But their theology it contradicted itself, you know what I mean? So it wasn't until my mid-30s that I realized that sin is important, that's a big part of the story of Jesus Christ. He didn't just come to forgive everybody and love everyone, but he also came to save us from sin. And so that's why I eventually started to look more critically at the way I had been raised and the decisions that I had made. And eventually I became an advocate for a much more orthodox kind of Christianity.
Now, obviously, a lot of people can relate to this and a lot of people can't relate to it, but how difficult is it for someone such as yourself that is raised in a gay environment to come out of that environment and really understand how life is really supposed to be and how relationships are supposed to be? How difficult is that?
It is extremely difficult. I've done a lot of research not only on my own story, but on dozens of other cases of same-sex parenting, and unfortunately it's gotten harder. I think in the 70s and 80s when I was growing up, it was difficult because you're lacking a father figure, and there's this confusing arrangement where there's two women who both kind of have a maternal relationship to you. And that's just unusual. So it's a little bit hard to get all of the gender cues and to be socialized so that you can understand everybody around you and everyone can understand you. But in the 70s and 80s, it was in some ways easier because it wasn't a political issue, and gay parents didn't generally throw their kids into the middle of huge political debates. And, people didn't tend to publicize your family as an example of some social change. So when I've interviewed people who were born, let's say, after 1980, 1985, it's a lot harder because those kids grew up in gay homes, and a lot of times they came into the gay home not because there was a widow or a divorcee who came out of the closet after losing their partner and then got help from a new gay partner raising the child. A lot of the more recent children of same-sex couples came into the gay home because the adults arranged it through a sperm banking arrangement or through adoption. So it was really intentional. And they're also being presented to the public as if they are this stellar example of how great gay people are as parents, which puts a lot more pressure on the kid because the kid can't really voice anything negative, can't criticize it, and definitely can't dissent, from the whole situation. So.
Now, obviously being raised by two women, how was it explained to you in your situation? Well, as you got older, how was it explained to you that it came to be? Because obviously two women can't make you come to be. How was that handled in your situation?
Well, my mother and father split up right around the time that I was born, and my mom's partner was just a very stable presence in her life the whole time, but I knew that was not a parent. I mean, one of the women was my biological mother, the other one was my mother's partner. That was how I understood it. And I knew who my dad was, I just didn't have a relationship with him. I did connect with him in my late 20s, and we are close now. That's the sort of happy ending of the whole story, but it was a long journey to get to that point.
Have you been able to lead any of your parents to the Lord, or did your dad know the Lord already, or what's the story there?
My mother passed away when I was 19, and I think that she found the Lord through her liberation theology. So even though I might disagree with a lot of tenets of it, she did believe in the basic tenets of Christianity. Her partner, I think, was religious, coming from a Protestant background in a kind of mild way. But my dad is not religious at all.
Understand. So your background, what is it about your background or about your own situation that has caused you to really step up and protect the rights of innocent children?
I think it's because I know that I had perhaps the best case scenario because it was the same partner with my mother the whole time, and it was stable and it was low conflict. But I still had a lot of problems. I had a lot of difficulty. I engaged in a lot of self-destructive behavior, and it was a long time before I felt that I could function in romantic relationships myself. And when I stated this, even in the mildest form of criticism around 2012, 2013, I just saw such a huge backlash against me. It was vicious, and I realized that if I had the best case scenario, and I can't even talk about that, I can't imagine all these other kids that are being put in this situation who have a much worse situation. Like, look at Rosie O'Donnell's daughter, who ran away to go look for her biological mother, and Rosie O'Donnell went to the press and told the whole world that her daughter was crazy and was not taking her psychological medications, and that was the reason she had run away. I thought about kids who are in situations like that, and they definitely, they face such a huge backlash, and they're not in a really strong position to be able to voice an independent opinion because they're still young, they're still dependent on their parents. Their parents are still living and very politically active in a lot of cases. And, I was in a situation where I was tenured at a university, so I had a little bit more leeway to be able to voice these things. So that's why I felt like it really was important for me to come forward and speak.
You mentioned a lot of backlash. Was there any beyond verbal backlash? Did you suffer?
Oh, it was. I can't even get into it. It was horrible. There was vandalism on my office door. I have been physically threatened. People have gone online and put the telephone number and email of my supervisors and my supervisor's supervisors, and the place where I teach has been flooded with complaints. People have recruited students to try to turn against me. So there's a lot, and you're just constantly in these bureaucratic harassment situations where people are filing frivolous complaints against you. It's an endless mill of harassment. I think that the gay community, unfortunately, for all of its things that can be positive, because I think there are positive parts of the community, I think one of the unfortunate parts of it is it's one of the only communities I know of in the history of the United States that went after their own children. You know what I mean? If their children didn't agree with the whole thing, it wasn't just saying, okay, you're my child and now you've grown up and you have your own thoughts. It's, I'm going to destroy you. I'm going to humiliate you in the public square. I'm going to make sure you're fired. I'm going to make sure nobody loves you and nobody talks to you. It's a level of severity that I think should give us pause about the whole community and whether this community is really ready to adopt.
In the book, you talk about same-sex marriage, and you call it social disaster.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Because I think that we have to rearrange so much in society, and we have to force sacrifices on so many people in order to make same-sex marriage work. It's really just not worth the sacrifices. It's more harm than the benefits. But it's just hard to communicate that to the public because, that book's 500 pages. It takes a lot of documentation to explain it and lay your case out. And I think in the debate about same-sex marriage, people really didn't go to that level of detail. They just, it was at the level of bumper stickers and hashtags. So.
Now, you actually even refer to same-sex marriage not as a debate, but as a war.
Yes, I think it was just like warfare. People just went out to destroy their enemies, to totally disable them. It wasn't, even the debate about abortion, I don't think that people went after pro-life people to the extent of wanting to completely destroy them socially and drive them to suicide and get them cut off from their family and fired. They engaged in forms of destruction that really struck very close to home. They recruited people's family members to snitch on them. I think when we go back in 20 or 30 years and people look at this time period, it's going to look much worse than what we call McCarthyism. It's going to be a very ugly phase of history, but we have to wait for the history books to kind of write it.
Now, in the book, you go as far as to equate the adoption of children by gays and lesbians as a form of slavery. Explain further what you mean by that.
Well, it's not necessarily adoption, but it is the third-party reproduction arrangements where you're buying and selling children, and there's a contract, and you're basically binding this child in submission to you, even though you're not their parent. And it's not because there was some tragedy. Adoption is legitimate if there is some tragedy and there's a kid in need, and the living parents are not available, or it's an orphan, and you're placing the child with the only available home that can love the child. There's a long, long waiting list of people who want to adopt. So it's a false argument that you need to give gay people children because there are these children that nobody else wants to raise. But anyways, that's not really the kind of gay parenting that led me to look at the history of slavery. I came to that because what gay couples are finding is that when they can't adopt children out of foster care, or there are no available infant adoptions for them, they arrange to essentially exchange money for custody of children that aren't theirs. And that is, in essence, buying and selling people. And I think that constitutionally, at some point, people are going to look at this, and I don't even think it's constitutional, a lot of the arrangements that they're arranging. Now, I should say that it's not just gays who do that. Heterosexuals developed a lot of these surrogacy arrangements and a lot of the sperm banking prior. But it's really the gay and lesbian movement that's driving the growth in those industries. And I think turning it into a kind of industry in buying and selling people that's a lot worse than we've seen before.
Mm. To what extent would you say, Robert, that the redefining of the family is part of the overall agenda of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community and activist?
Well, I think that the thing about it is that there is a community of people who identify as gay who never really wanted to get into this political argument. They wanted to live their lives. I think a lot of them are good people. I know a lot of them. I've lived around them. I care a lot about a lot of those. But there is a movement that arose, I would say, in the late 1990s that is increasingly interested in just having control over the political process and over every kind of political process, whether it's at the state level or federal level. And I think family law is a way for them to do it, because you end up imposing these codes that you know are going to conflict with people's definitions, that you know are going to make it necessary for you to impose definitions and language and relationships on people that people are going to resist. And so you have an entire enforcement mechanism. So you end up with a situation like Kim Davis being thrown in jail, regardless of how we feel about somebody not doing their public duty. It's an extreme measure, but I think that is exactly the kind of scenario that a lot of people at the leadership of this movement were looking to create right from the beginning, because they like the power. They like being able to flex their muscles and show people, if you don't give us what we want, if you don't conform to the way we think things should be, you will end up in jail. I mean, that is totalitarian logic, and I think there is a very strong totalitarian streak in this movement that people have to take seriously. You can't just think that it's conspiracy theory or I'm being hysterical. I mean, we have to look objectively at what they're doing, and they are trying to exert control over more and more parts of society.
We're talking about the book Jephthah's Daughter, Innocent Casualties in the War of Family Equality by Robert Oscar Lopez. Robert, is there a website that one could visit to perhaps learn more about the book, about some of the topics you're talking on, and best place to obtain a copy of the book?
Okay, well, the book is on Amazon.com, and the hard part of it is always the spelling of that first name, because I wanted to be true to the biblical story that I took that reference from, but people have a hard time with the spelling. So it's Jephthah, Jephthah. He's a character from the Old Testament. So it's Jephthah's Daughters, Innocent Casualties in the War for Family Equality. It's on Amazon. If you look me up by my author name, Robert Oscar Lopez, you'll find it pretty quickly. I also am the president of the International Children's Rights Institute, and so there's a website, internationalchildrensrights.com, which we're relaunching. It's up now, but it's going to look even better in a couple of days. And that's a place where there are a lot of links to the kind of work that we do and a lot of the research that's done by the contributors who contributed chapters to that book.
And one more time, that other website, international?
Childrensrights.com.
Childrensrights.com. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Line from the book. Here's what it says. Having the children under their power is an abuse of adult strength and a misuse of state authority. It's not a devotion of any kind, rather cruelty and selfishness. Stop going easy on same-sex parenting. Talk to us about those sentences.
I mean, I think there's no other, because a lot of people have neighbors or friends who are in those kinds of relationships and who created those homes and have children in those homes. But ultimately, you don't have a right to that. I mean, even if you're not religious, even if this has nothing to do with the Bible, you don't want to live in a society where human beings do not have a right to the mother and father who gave them life. You don't want to turn children into products. All of that is an abuse of power. And gay people are not the only people who do these kinds of things where they cut children off from their heritage and they turn them into products and they have black markets for babies. Heterosexuals do that all the time. I mean, Boko Haram is heavily involved in that kind of activity. But we have to be honest that this is an integral part of same-sex parenting because they cannot conceive kids naturally, and it's a big part of it, and it's cruelty. You can make as many cereal commercials and as many detergent commercials where you try to romanticize it and make it look really harmless, but it is ultimately you're turning children into products and you're taking something from them that's sacred and universal and permanent. You know, if you conceive a child through a surrogacy contract or you smuggle a child in from a third world country and then get their visa approved because people are really sympathetic to same-sex parenting right now, I mean, you've basically consigned that child to a life without their mother and father, and that's cruel. Mm. So I think that there's no real nice way to put that. As harsh as it sounds, and a lot of times the things that I write, they look a lot harsher than when I'm thinking them. But I do stand by it. I really do.
Why do children in gay adoptions lose?
What do they lose?
No, why do they lose?
They
what
lose,
and what do they lose too? But you can answer both.
Yeah, I think that they lose something that everybody is entitled to, which is a mother and a father. Now, I'm not saying that if there's a single mother who was abandoned by the man who impregnated her, that we should take that child away from her, okay? And I'm not saying that widows should have their children taken away from them. But, setting aside tragedies and things that are outside of people's control, I think that our benchmark, our gold standard has to be that children come into the world with no language, no property, no real possessions, but they do all come into the world with a mother and father. That's what makes us all equal in our creation. And you cannot just create a situation where one of those things is taken away from a child for no other darn reason other than because adults want a different arrangement. So a child that's adopted into a gay home, let's say you're a special needs child. Let's say you have emotional problems and you're in the foster care system. That doesn't mean that you're a lesser person and that you don't deserve a mom and a dad. I mean, I can understand there might be temporary situations where you put a child in foster care with a gay couple, and then you wait a couple of years until things stabilize with their birth family, and then maybe you'll have a lifelong relationship with that couple and you'll be grateful. But it's different when you adopt and you legally erase the mother and father that brought them into the world. That's unfair. That's inequality. That's oppression. So I would say that is why they lose. And it's not necessary right now. It is a myth that there's this huge backlog of babies with nobody to adopt them. That just is not what the case is. There's a very long waiting list of people who want to adopt. A lot of people end up going internationally. And we hear about the kids who are in foster care, but, those are typically kids who are a little bit older, who are difficult to place, who have living parents. And being in foster care doesn't need to be the worst thing in the world. You need to work on foster care so that there are temporary arrangements where we can give care to kids in need without severing them from their original family. So I guess that's a long way of answering your question. That's why I would say that those kids lose.
Mm. You also say that same-sex marriage cheapens marriage And how do you respond to those who say that if two people love one another, they should have the same rights as anyone else?
I agree with that. If two people love each other, they should, be able to live together and be left alone. I think that they should be able to visit each other's house, but you don't have to have that exact word, and nobody guarantees you other people's children. That's not equal rights. That's special privileges that go well far above and beyond what those two people deserve because they love each other.
You also make a distinction between the heterosexual parents and gay parents. What do you say, and what are the differences between those two sets of parents?
I'm sorry, what are the differences between straight parents and gay parents?
That's right, heterosexual parents and gay parents.
I think it's just a basic reality that one includes a mother and a father, one includes gender diversity, and the other is segregated by gender. So that's a major distinction. I think from that difference flow a lot of these other complications that we're talking about. And that's beyond that, there's also the question that when you have a mother and a father together, the chances are that they conceived the child through lovemaking, and there's no other third party that is also a parent but has been cut out of the situation. When in the other one, where there's two people of the same sex, if there's a kid involved, 100% of the time there's somebody else who's been cut out of that home, and that bond has been broken, and that breaking of the bond is a loss to the child.
The Matthew Shepard case is repeatedly brought up time and time again by the gay community as an example of homophobia. What is the real story, and why didn't we hear it?
Well, that was in a chapter for the section that I had on the gay community itself, right? That one, I drew a lot of that information from a specific book written by Stephen Jimenez, who spent 10 years researching that case. It appears now, looking at it, that the initial reports that circulated right after he was killed, that this was a gay bashing, were not accurate. That the conflict had to do with drug dealing, and it looks like at least one of the two killers, possibly both, was actually bisexual and had had previous sexual relationships with the victim. And then on top of it, both of the killers were in relationships with girls who had been raised by lesbian couples. And in both cases, the killers got along well with the lesbian couple. So it doesn't look like they were driven by this rank hatred of homosexuals, or that was really the key event that played. I think we didn't hear about it because the story served too many people's political purposes, to be totally frank with you. People really wanted a poster boy for homophobia, and they wanted a kind of compelling story that would drive a lot of fundraising efforts, and that's essentially what they did. They raised a lot of money. The Matthew Shepard Foundation is very, very well funded, to say the least. Do you know what I mean? So I think it was just too convenient for people to pass up on.
What is your advice to people out there that really struggle with this type of lifestyle, and obviously they want to try to live by what God says, but they really struggle because of the children, as you've brought up in this book? What's your best advice to those people?
You mean people who are gay, or people who have
people that are heterosexual, that are seeing things like you've talked about, and they are bothered by it, and obviously they can only do so much legally. What's the best advice you can give them?
I think that you have to live in truth, and you have to be brave. And it goes without saying that you should be driven by love and not by hate. But you have to understand that one of the faces of love is truth. And, you don't do good things to people you love by lying to them. So, if you have that family member who is a lesbian who wants to go to a sperm bank and have a child, I don't think that it serves anybody's purposes for you to tell them before they do this, when there's a chance that you might be able to intervene. I don't think it's a good idea to tell them to their face, oh, it's great, just go do it and everything will work out fine. Times are changing. When they have a child, you have to, of course, show great compassion to the child, and, you have to be sensitive to that situation. You don't bring up these topics in front of the child because the kid's just trying to grow up. You want to give them as much of a sense of normalcy that you can within the limits of their situation. But I think that in dealing with the adults who make these decisions, and the ones who are responsible for these situations, I think it is important to be truthful and to be strong in your principles, to be tactful and to be strategic, but not to lie.
Mm.
So.
Finally, Robert, of course, there are many people out there that realize what you realize and what I realize, and many other people that have asked Jesus to be the Lord of their life and believe in that second chance. That, of course, if this world didn't have sin, none of these problems would exist, but unfortunately there is a lot of sin and a lot of things that have caused these different things to come up, such as the gay and lesbian lifestyle. But ultimately, there are people out there that maybe have been in that lifestyle that are at a place they realize that the true happiness and the true love they're looking for is Jesus Christ, because his Father, God, sent him to die so that you and I can have life more abundantly. And, of course, the thing that they need is someone to pray. So if they're listening to the program today and they would like someone to pray, Robert, we would ask that if you'd be willing to pray with those listeners right now.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, okay. Well, I would just pray to you bless us with your divine plan for what you have for all of us. Every single one of us has a mission and fits into your plan, and I just pray that you make it possible for each of us to do your will and to reach full potential in your glory. Amen.
Our guest on Second Chances has been Robert Oscar Lopez, Jephthah's daughter, innocent casualties in the war for family equality. And Robert, one more time, best place to find the book and website they could visit?
And it's the only book with that title, Jephthah's Daughters. And the website is internationalchildrensrights.com.
Okay. We want to thank you for being a guest.
All right. Thank you so much.
Our guest has been Robert Oscar Lopez. Tune in next week for more Second Chances right here from Advantage Radio Ministries on Lift FM.